Well, hi class. I've just been going through all of the topic proposals for the informative speech, and you guys are really coming up with some good topics for this speech. I've got a few more things to say on the topics, but real quick, right at the outset, important announcement. This Friday, April 2nd, that is the last day that you can drop a class for the 18-week spring semester and still get a W. So I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not going to drop anyone. This is an online class, and even if you haven't turned in a lot of work, you can still get caught up and get your work turned in. So I'm not dropping anybody. But if you haven't been doing your work and you know that you aren't going to be able to continue on with the course, then you want to make sure you drop the course no later than Friday, so that you can get a W. After Friday, if you're still in the class, I have to give you a letter grade at the end of the semester. So really, I would just have those of you that know you're not going to be able to put in the work that it takes to finish the class, I would much rather give you a W than an F. So you've got to make that decision by the end of the week, April 2nd. That's the last day to drop a class. I do think they still have that emergency waiver because of COVID, so that even if you stay in the class and then something comes up and you can't finish the class, I believe that you can still apply for that waiver. But don't take my word for it. Check that out on the Solano website. So Friday, April 2nd, Good Friday, last day to drop an 18-week course and get a W. After April 2nd, if you're still in the class, you have to receive a grade, okay? All right, so today I want to talk a little bit about the topics for the informative speech, and some of you have opted to do a persuasive topic in lieu of an informative topic for this informative speech assignment, and that's fine with me. But some of you that are doing the behavioral persuasive speech, that's where you're focusing on a problem to be solved. In fact, a couple of you are doing your speeches on climate change. So that clearly is a behavioral persuasive speech. Kind of the idea of that speech is to try to persuade the audience to take more action, to do more things that will stop and prevent climate change from happening. So if that's the case, you want to use the behavioral persuasive outline format. So let me just make sure you know where to find that. Let's go ahead and jump on the modules. Okay, so we're on the modules now, and right here we see the informative speech module, and that's the module that you'll be working on this week and for the next couple weeks. And remember, next week is spring break, so even though I know a lot of you will be working on stuff during spring break, I'll still be checking my emails and getting work done during spring break, so I'm still available. But for the next couple weeks, you're working on the informative speech. Now, for those of you that have opted to do a persuasive speech instead, and if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, that's where you're focusing on a problem, and the goal is to try to get the audience to take action to solve a particular problem, then as you put your outline together, you want to jump down to the persuasive speech module, and then you want to take a look at the behavioral persuasive sample speech outline, and you want to follow that outline format. So we'll go ahead and click on that. Here you have a sample outline for the behavioral persuasive speech. And the reason why you want to use this outline is because the main points are already set up. And if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, in the body of the speech, basically you're going to do three things. The first main point would be effects of the problem. These are the things, the physical manifestations that tell us that something is wrong. So if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech on climate change, you would be telling us all of the bad things that happen as a result of climate change. You would be talking about the fires up here in Northern California as an example, a negative consequence of climate change. Then, second main point, you would focus on the causes of the problem, right? Why does the problem exist? What is the reasons for the particular problem? And then the last main point, you would focus on solutions, or what you are advocating that we as audience members take? What kind of action do we take to be involved in actually solving the problem? And the challenging thing about a behavioral persuasive speech is the idea is at the end of the speech, the audience is actually motivated to follow through and to take action on the solutions that you offer in the speech. And some of you that decided to go the behavioral persuasive route and you hadn't taken a look at the sample outline for the behavioral persuasive speech, I could tell when you listed your main points that you were kind of on the same track, right? You were focusing on the problems, the things that are going wrong with climate change, reasons why they exist, and here are things that we can do to deal with the actual problem. So just remember, behavioral persuasive speaking, effects of the problem, causes of the problem, solutions to the problem. You want to follow that outline format. If you're doing an attitudinal persuasive speech, then you just follow the same outline format that you would for the informative speech. The only thing that changes is you want each of your main points in that attitudinal persuasive to be arguments or to be evidence that supports your take on the particular issue. All right, let's say that you're advocating against online instruction, then your main points would be the 3 reasons why online instruction doesn't work, right? If you're doing the opposite, hey, online instruction is cool, that's the way to go, then your 3 main points would be 3 arguments as to why online instruction is good. And while we're taking a look at the sample outline, just as kind of a reminder, remember, one of the more important things we're going to learn both with the informative and the persuasive speeches, these are what we call academic speeches, meaning we're incorporating research and evidence into the speech. So getting your source citations into the speech are real important. Regardless of whether you're doing an informative speech or a persuasive speech, you want to make sure that you have a minimum of 4 source citations in the flow of the speech. And again, because we don't end our speech with the works cited, we're incorporating the source citations into the text of the speech. We're actually saying or citing the sources as we're delivering the speech. And here you see an example. This is a behavioral persuasive speech, and it's on factory farming. And so here in the significance, that's where your first source should appear, right? And remember the 3 components of a source citation: title of the publication or the website. So we have the ASPCA website, all right? We don't need the name of the article. Too long for us to remember, too long for the audience to remember, but we do want to have the date, all right? And here, because there wasn't a date on the website, we're giving the date that we last accessed the information. And then you want to give the name of the person who wrote the actual article. So just remember, anytime you're citing a source, title of the publication or website, and always give us the name of the website rather than the long address. It's just easier to remember. And then you want to give us the date, and then you want to give us the author. Let's take a look at another source citation. All right, here's another one. And again, name of the author, according to Fred Saunders in the June 2020. All right, we've got the date, Last Chance for Animals newsletter. That would be the title of the publication. So remember, when you're citing a source, name of the person who said it, the date, title of the website, or the title of the publication. And while I don't want to discourage you from using online sources or information from websites, you're better off, especially when you're in college, using actual published sources. Use the databases, EBSCOhost, ProQuest, LexisNexis, even Google Scholar, because if you're doing a search on any of those databases, that information is published, right? It's not coming from a website, so you will always know the title of the publication, you will always know the author, you will always know the date, so that's a good habit to get into, especially while you're in college. Research is so important. So, we've got the source. Here's another source citation in an article in the Sacramento Bee on August 10th, 2018, farmer Lowell Murray, right? So again, title of the publication, Sacramento Bee, That's the name of the newspaper. I've got the date that it was in the newspaper. I've got the name of the person who said it. And a couple of you have sent me emails like, oh, what if I can't find the author? Well, if I don't know the author or the date, I don't use the source. And I think that's a better way to determine, especially with internet sources, whether I can use that information or I shouldn't use that information. If I don't have a date, if I don't have an author, I go find another source. And when you're doing research, it's not just about getting the minimum sources into the speech. You want to get the best possible sources, because the best possible sources have the most impact and give you the most credibility. So when you're doing research, always look for the best sources, right? If you're going to buy a house, right, you're not just going to rely on any information. You want to make sure that the information that you're basing that decision on is good, credible, reliable research. Let's do the same thing when we're in college and we're getting research for our work. Best possible sources. Okay? All right. Last thing I want to talk about, I want to give you some tips on how to practice. So right now, most of you are still working on your outline for the informative speech presentation. Those outlines are due at the end of the week on the 2nd. And then you've got from the 2nd of April all the way until the 18th of April. That's the due date for getting your informative speeches turned in. So let's talk about what can we do to prepare and practice so we really can nail those presentations when we get to the middle of April. The next thing I want to share with you is what I think is the most important information that you can apply if you really want to learn to be an effective public speaker, and that is practice. There's no secret to success when it comes to being a good speaker. You just put in the practice and the preparation. And most of you, probably up until the time you took this class, when you did have opportunities to give a presentation, most of the time you kind of wait until the last minute, then you write down what it is you want to say, and then you go ahead and give the presentation with little to no practice. And I've said this before, that's why so many people are nervous wrecks when it comes to public speaking, because you haven't done the preparation, you haven't put in the practice. And practice and preparation go hand in hand with being confident. So the more you practice, the more prepared you are, the more confident you're going to feel about the performance, and so the less anxiety you have to control. Now, here's my prescription, right? I'm the pharmacist, or I'm the doctor, okay? Now, you want to be a good public speaker? Here's the prescription. Always make sure, as much as possible, that you have at least a week between the writing of the speech and the presenting of the presentation, because I want at least a week to practice. That's why with this informative speech assignment, your outlines are due on Friday the 2nd, but you don't have to present your speech until the 18th of April. You have more than 2 weeks. And so if you just follow this simple advice, in those days between finishing the speech and delivering the speech, just take your outline and read your speech out loud from the outline 3 times a day. And what I'm trying to teach here is I don't want you to memorize the speech, because that doesn't work very well. And you can always tell when someone gets stuck in a speech if it's memorized. What usually happens is they'll get halfway through a sentence, pause, oh crap, I can't think of the next line. And then typically, because they've memorized it, they'll go back to the start of the line. And now for my next point. Oh crap, I went over my speech. I thought I had this down. And now for my next point. And now for my next point, I will continue on with, and then they continue on with the speech. I don't want that, right? Because when you memorize a speech, typically you start with the introduction and you're just memorizing chunks, and you're adding those chunks until you get the entire speech memorized. But that always means the latter part of the speech will not be as good as the beginning of the speech, because you have practiced it less times. So what I'm after is repetition is the key to retention. And the more you just repeat something without trying to memorize it, but the more you repeat something, the more you use information, the easier it is to remember or retain that information. And so actually what I'm advocating is you take a week, 2 weeks works perfect. You want to get something down so you can deliver a presentation without using the notes. Practice that presentation 3 times a day, every day for 14 days. Even for those of us that are getting a little up there in years and we struggle with remembering information, that 14-day, 3 times a day going over your speech, that will work. But even if it's just a week, you want to make sure that 3 times a day you pick up your outline and you read your speech out loud. Now you've got to do it out loud. You just don't want to kind of look at the speech and go over it in your mind. You've got to speak the words into existence. And then each time you read your speech out loud, focus on a different specific delivery technique. So maybe the first time that I read it out loud, I just want to try to get into a conversational flow. So I just said, I do everything, I write it out. So I've got my speech here on a legal pad. So all I'm going to do is that first time is I'm going to read through the speech out loud. And all I'm going to do is to try to kind of get into a conversational flow. A lot of you didn't do so well with the delivery of the critic speech because you were just reading your speech straight from the outline. You know, some of you have it on your computer screen. We can see it reflected if you're wearing glasses, but we can kind of see your eyes moving as you're going through the speech. We don't want that. Again, with this presentation, we want to give the appearance of actually speaking to an audience, so we want our eyes on the camera. And so the more I'm looking into the camera, the better my opportunity to engage the audience and maintain their attention and keep them into the presentation. So I'm just going to read the speech out loud, trying to get that conversational flow so it doesn't sound like I'm reading. And the best way to do that is to use lots of vocal variety. You want to continually shift your rate and volume, and then learn to put pauses in different places in phrases. Some of you kind of had the vocal variety down where I'm getting shifts in your rate and volume in the critic speech, but it's kind of the same for each line because you might have the pause in the same place. So if you really want to work on vocal variety, figure out where to put pauses and put them in different places within the phrasing or the sentences so each line sounds a little bit different. And the reason why that's important is you never want your audience to get comfortable with your rhythmic pattern or your vocal pattern because it will lull the audience to sleep. So we want to keep the audience off balance, always changing up the rate and volume. And you get really good at that. And then we get back to where actually speaking in public and you've got an actual physical audience. You can get the vocal variety down to where you can move your audience back and then pull them forward, right? So you can use your voice to really impact maintaining the attention of the audience and keeping them into your speech. But then maybe the next time I read it out loud, I'm just going to focus on my eye contact. So I'm going to look down, see the line, I'm going to look up, and I'm going to say each line into the camera. Look down, see the next line, look up, and say it into the camera. So I'm getting real used to looking at that camera lens as being the actual audience member, and I'm speaking to the audience or I'm speaking to the camera. And then maybe the third time I go through it, I'm going to move back just a little bit and I'm going to work on getting my hands involved. And so I'm just going to start gesturing a little bit more. Probably have to move back a little bit further, get that screen tilted down a little bit more. Now I can get my hands involved and I can think about gestures. If you received a comment about picking up the energy or the enthusiasm, just get your hands involved. You'll notice this. If you start using more gestures, you will speak with more energy. So that's a nice little key there. You want to pick up the energy, really maximize what you're doing to keep the audience into the presentation. Use your hands, get your hands involved, use some gestures. And so each day I want to read through my speech 3 times. I want to read through it out loud. And each time I do, I'm going to focus on a different delivery technique. You'll find, especially if you do this for 2 weeks, by the time you get to the end of the first week, you're just going to have your speech down a lot more than when you started and you never tried to memorize the speech. And so then maybe after a week of practicing 3 times a day, now practice giving your speech and see how long you can go where you're looking into the camera and you don't have to glance down and see the next line. And you just do that 3 times a day for the second week. By the time you get to the 18th, you're going to have your speech down. You're not even going to need the outline. You're going to have that speech down, and you never tried to memorize it. You simply overlearned the information through repetition. It's the same way that you guys hear a song on the radio or whatever you're listening to, song comes on that you like, bam, you know all the words to the song. And you never said, I like that song, I'm going to commit it to memory. No, repetition is the key to retention. And so you want to really nail the delivery. Once you get your outline finished, start reading your speech out loud from the outline 3 times a day, every day. 5 would be kind of the shortest amount. I would shoot for 7. If I can do it for 14, I'm going to nail that final presentation. Oh, and just imagine what that does to your confidence, right? You practice your speech 3 times a day, every day for 14 days. You're going to be way more confident. You're going to be way more adept at controlling that nervous anxiety, if any, because of that practice and effort. And you're going to excel on the final presentation. There's no secret to being a successful public speaker. Just do the work, put in the practice, put in the effort. If you're willing to do that, anyone can be a great public speaker. All right, you guys have a good week. No recording next week because of spring break, but I'll be around. You have a question, you go ahead and hit me up, send me an email. Happy to help you. And I'm going to start in. I've got some of you that turned your outlines in already. I've got those done back to you. A lot more starting to come in. So I really try to stay on top of that so I can get that outline back to you as soon as possible. Because unless you're really confident that your outline looks good, and best way to do that is once you have your outline done, compare it to one of the sample outlines. If your outline looks the same as far as the formatting, the organization, you've got your 4 source citations in, you've got all your transitions in, where they go, you've got that set, then go ahead and start learning the speech. If you're, I'm not quite sure if I did this 3rd main point right, maybe want to hold back on learning that till you get feedback on the outline from me, because some of you may have some minor changes to make. Most of you, the biggest thing that you'll have to correct on the outlines will be the source citations. So just remember, make your source citations clear, work them into the text. Also, your source citations should always come before you give us the information from the source. It flows a little bit better, and we're establishing the credibility of the information before we present it. All right, do a good job putting your outline together, and then put in the time that it takes to practice the delivery. If you do that, you're going to do great on this next speech assignment. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.